shlach lecha. And what I want to do is I'd like to talk about the mitzvah of challah in 3 parts. Part number 1, first section, is I want to talk about the basis for the mitzvah, meaning, the source in the Torah, and then the Talmud to the Shulchan Aruch. So the sort of the basis for the mitzvah of challah. The second thing I want to talk about is the halachot, practical halacha. How do I perform the mitzvah of separating challah today? That's the second part. And then the third part of our class is to talk about the symbolism of challah. It's a very unusual mitzvah, and in the third section I want to talk about the symbolism of challah, particularly connecting it to its context. As you know, it appears, this week's parasha Shalach Lecha, is the story of the spies, and we will discover a fascinating connection between the story of the spies and the mitzvah of challah. I hope that as a result of speaking about challah in these 3 areas, the source of the mitzvah, the halachot, and the symbolism, please God, in 2 nights' time, when we sit down at our Shabbat meals and we have the honor of eating challah, we will be eating our challah with renewed excitement, knowing that the challah that we will be eating, most likely, the mitzvah of separating challah was performed on that bread. Although, the truth is, it's on all bread, but that particular bread, we happen to call it challah. Okay, so let's go to the source of the mitzvah. If you look in your the source sheets over here, it's source number 1. This is the mitzvah. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, Daber el bnei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people, va'amarta lehem, and tell them, Bevo achem el haaretz, when you enter the land of Israel, asher ani mevi otchem sham, until when you arrive in the land that I will bring you there, God will bring us to the land of Israel, as indeed He did. As we, the beginning of the book of Yoshua, v'haya, and it will be, ba'achalchem milechem haaretz, when you eat the bread of the land, tarimu teruma lashem. You need to give from that bread a donation to God. It goes to the Kohanim. The Kohanim are the ones that receive the donation of the challah. And what do you give? Reshit arisotechem, the first part of your dough. Challah, tarim, you should separate as challah. Truma, kitruma, goren, kein tarum lashem. Just like we have a mitzvah of truma. We give tithes from our fruit. That you give from when we have fruit, we separate trumot and ma'asrot. So this is a similar mitzvah. All of the rules of eating it in purity that apply to the truma and maaser on an orange also apply to this truma, this donation which is given to the Cohn. But this donation isn't called a truma, it's called challah. Okay, that's it. May reshit arudot tidnu lashem truma ledorotechem, for all generations. So that's the mitzvah of challah. Now the mitzvah of challah is different to every other donation, because when I go to my field and I harvest my grapes, so then I'm going to take from the grapes that grew in my vineyard, I'm going to take from the grapes and I'm going to give a donation of those grapes, give the truma to the Cohn, give the maaser to the Levi, and then in different years, sometimes an extra maaser to the people that are needy, and in other years, bring some of it to eat in Jerusalem. But that's stuff that grows in my field. Here, the mitzvah of challah, I'm creating something at home. I'm creating a dough. And then once I've created the dough, that makes it liable, eligible to fulfill the mitzvah of separating from that dough. You see how it's different? It's not that I'm taking a product and then taking a tithe from a product. I'm creating something, a dough, and then once I've created the dough, then I have this obligation to separate from that dough. You follow?
10%.
Ma?
10% from
No. Not nowadays. It's a small amount. Truma used to be a smaller amount. Maaser is a tenth. But a truma, the Torah doesn't tell us the amount. There's the Talmud gives recommendations, but it's less than a tenth. Okay. Nowadays, because we are we are impure, so therefore we can't separate it because it will be impure. And then you have to give it to a Cohn, and the Cohn can't eat it because he's impure. Since the Torah doesn't state how much, you just give a minimal amount. You separate it and then you discard it. Okay. So from this statement that we saw in the Torah, we go to the Talmud. The Talmud takes this from the Torah to a halacha. How to translate into the halacha? So the Gemara in source number 2 in Eruvin says, Tanu Rabbanon, our rabbis taught, Reishit arisotechem. That means the beginning of your dough. Kadei isotechem, v'chama isotechem, kadei isat hamidbar, v'chama isat hamidbar, dichtiv, va'omer asirit ha'ifahu. So the Talmud says, how much? Meaning, how much dough do I need to create in order to be liable to make a truma? You know, if you're making just a small little dough, you're not obliged to separate challah. We separate nowadays without making a blessing. But the mitzvah, I fulfill the mitzvah of separating challah only when I give, and the the Gemara tells us, asirit ha'efa. Efa is an amount of nefa of volume, a tenth of an efa. We'll go later down in the source sheets to see exactly how much that is. Okay, so what type of dough is eligible? What type of dough do we have to give challah on? So the tur, Fabrizio, we were talking about the tur today. The tur is a book of halacha. In fact, it is right behind you over there. Do you see that?
This one?
Yes, exactly. That is the tur. The tur is a very interesting book. The tur is a book of halacha in 4 sections. So in the tur, in the section Yoredeh, he writes, the Torah tells us, Reishit arisotechem chalat arumu, truma, melamed shechayav kol adam lahafrish chala me'isato v'litna lakohen. ואין השיעור מן התורה, אפילו כלשהו, רק שלא יעשה כל העיסה חלה, אלא ישייר ממנה מעט. וחכמים נתנו לשיעור, כאשר התפאר, as we saw in the Braita, ואין חיוב זה אלא בארץ. דכתיב, ואכלתם מלחם הארץ, ומדרבנן נוהג אפילו בחוץ לארץ. Okay, so what's the Torah told us? The Torah told us a few important principles in the mitzvah of Challah. First of all, he says, everybody is required to separate challah. It's not a mitzvah on men or a mitzvah on women. Everybody is required to donate it. But you have to leave some of it for yourself. You know, let's say I want to give a donation to God. I can't make a huge dough and then donate the entire dough as a truma, as a mitzvah of challah. Challah has to be separated from dough that I'm making for myself. You follow? Which is interesting, because it indicates, the Torah is indicating, that it's not about preparing a meal for somebody else. It's more about awareness that when I'm making the dough for myself, I have to take from my dough and give some of my dough to the Cohn. Those are the words of the Torah. According to the Torah, it's only a mitzvah that applies in the land of Israel. But nowadays we fulfill the mitzvah of Challah everywhere, not just in the land of Israel, but even in Chutz La'aretz.
Well,
now, yes.
The men are fulfilled, but they definitely do it.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
Just practice it in Chutz La'aretz.
Absolutely, quite right. You're absolutely right there. Thank you. Yet another important point from Zechariah. Yes. Now, I want to spend a minute on this interesting point that let's say if I make a dough, right? Let's say my dough is 5 kilos, right? So then I make 4 kilos for myself, and 1 kilo I give to the Cohen. You think, wow, kol hakavod lecha. And then let's say I take 5 kilos and I keep 3 kilos for myself, and give 2 to the Cohen. Oh, wow, you're even better. And let's say I make 5 kilos and I give away 4 kilos and only keep 1 kilo for myself. That's amazing. And I give 4.5 kilos and that's also great. However, if I would donate all 5 kilos, the whole thing, to the Cohen, then I didn't fulfill the mitzvah. Why do you think that is? Do you understand my point?
Again, because you have to increase Shabbat. What are you going to eat in Shabbat if you give everything? Like, it's a mitzvah to have.
So the truth is, the word challah is a bit misleading here.
Okay.
Because we know when we say the word challah, we think Friday night, Shabbat morning, right? We call that bread challah.
Yeah.
But the truth is, if you're making a loaf of bread for a Tuesday, the mitzvah that we're discussing here is challah, isn't referring only to the challah that we eat on Friday night.
Okay.
Challah is the term that I give to the dough that I've separated. Just like when I have my pile of oranges and I separate an orange and I call that orange truma. So when I have a dough and I separate a small part of the dough, that is called challah.
Okay.
Now, we've now taken that word challah, not to refer to this little bit that I've separated. We use a term now to refer to the bread that we eat on Friday night. But really, in the Torah, the word challah is like the word truma, or like the word maaser. It is the term that I use to denote that bread, that dough, sorry. It's that dough that I've set aside to give to the Cohen. You follow? Now, so if I set the whole, instead of taking some for me and some for the Cohen, I'm gonna make, I don't know, lots of loaves of bread only for the Kohanim. I didn't fulfill the mitzvah of challah. I only fulfill the mitzvah of challah when some of it is for me, some of it is for me, and some of it is a donation. But if all of it is a donation, then I didn't fulfill the mitzvah. So my question to you is why? Why is that the case? Why can't I just donate everything?
Because it's a mitzvah d'oraita. We give us the instruction to separate. It's like masrot.
That's true, yes. But why is it that I have to ensure that I keep some of it to myself? You hear the question? If I give it all, I haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. I'll give you an example. Let's say I win the lottery, right? And let's say, well, not win the lottery, but let's say, I don't know, I do very well, and I win 100,000 shekel, right? So I get 100,000 shekel, and I decide it's beyond, like it's a gift. It just like landed. I don't need it to survive because I already have an income. But I got an extra 100,000 shekel. So if I were to give 50,000 shekel, that would be great. 75,000 shekel, greater. But if I would give all 100,000 shekel, that would be amazing. Kol hakavod lecha, that's such a great donation that you've decided to give. But with challah, we don't say that. If I gave it all away, then I didn't fulfill the mitzvah of challah. You hear my question? So the question is why? Any ideas on that?
So the mitzvah is to separate.
Oh, good, you're doing good, yes.
You can't separate. If you give it all to the Cohen, you haven't separated.
Excellent. Very good. The mitzvah is about the separation, exactly. It's not about the donation, it's about the separation. Why? And then we get to this interesting idea that it's a very unusual donation because I create something, and then by creating this dough, I create a chiyuv. You follow? Okay. Let's say when I watch my grapes grow in the vineyard, and the grapes are growing and growing and growing, so then I know from the minute they start growing, I know that part of these grapes I'm going to have to donate. I'll have the honor of donating them as trumot and masrot. But the chiyuv sort of is clear right from the beginning. You follow? Here, when I create the dough, I create the chiyuv with the dough. You follow what I'm saying? Do you see how that's unusual?
Yeah, like you weren't obligated to bring the challah, but when you make the challah, then you have to separate.
Exactly. So I'm creating. Yeah, exactly. And perhaps that's gets to the essence of why, if I gave the whole thing away, it wouldn't work. I'm not an expert. I remember thinking about this and once reading, maybe one of you knows better than I do, about the history of bread. Bread is a stable food. Wherever you go in the world, there's bread. People eat bread everywhere. Certainly in halakha, when you speak about a significant meal means bread, right? But bread is a really clever little idea. It's not like an apple. You know, the first people that baked bread, in order to bake bread, they had to have found the wheat. They have to grind the wheat into flour, and then they have to mix the flour with water and with yeast and sometimes other things, and then wait for it to rise and then bake it. It's not something that you pick off a tree. It's something that I created. And I created it, and it became this staple food for everybody. It's an amazing human, I don't know what the word, the human achievement. Oh, you are such a gift. Yeah. I mean, we take it for granted nowadays, but the first guy who made bread will say, wow, whew, that was really good. And then he sort of like changed the world. Like we've never eaten in the same way since. You follow? Now, I could think when I pick an apple off a tree, I can pick an apple off the tree and say, thank you Hashem for this amazing apple. But when I bake a loaf of bread, I might have thought, well, thank you for the, but really, I mean, don't want to be rude or anything, but it was really me. I made that loaf of bread. You follow? I'm less likely to acknowledge God's involvement, and of course, it is God's. Thank God I'm able to create the bread. So there's a difference between the apple and the loaf of bread. And therefore, dafka, the loaf of bread, and it's when I'm creating something for myself, I have to separate off and say, as I eat my bread, acknowledge that making bread is also a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You hear that? And therefore, dafka bread, the staple food that I create, as opposed to I pick off a tree, or like grow in the ground, that's the one I need to acknowledge. And if you have a look carefully, you'll actually even see it in the verses. If you go back to source number 1, we said v'haya, and it will be ba'achalchem, when you eat me lechem haaretz. Do you know what lechem haaretz means? The bread
from the ground.
Yes, bread from the ground. I would have said bread from the oven. But it doesn't say bread from the oven, bread from the ground. Why? Because I acknowledge that I am as reliant on HaKadosh Baruch Hu for this loaf of bread as I am reliant on HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the apple that I picked off the tree. You follow? That's also why the bracha that we make on bread. Do you know what bracha we make on bread? Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Same, you follow? Based on this verse. You don't say that gave man the ability to invent bread, but God motzi lechem min haaretz. God extracts the bread from out of the ground. So bread, even though it's a human achievement to create bread, I still acknowledge in my eating of bread that it's all from Him. You follow? Yeah. Fruit and vegetables, maybe I would have seen without that. But bread, I need to do this in order to realize it's from Him. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, question, Rabbi.
Oh, thank you so much, Yosef. Yes.
Is there any source what the bracha do we say in the man?
Oh, that's a good question. They did. I don't know what the bracha was there.
Because it's from Shemayim.
Yeah, something like that. Hamotzi lechem min hashamayim.
Is it written somewhere? Gemara or?
Yeah, I think it is, but I don't know exactly where. Hamotzi lechem min hashamayim. Well, we haven't had man for a while, so. Good question. Okay, I'm going to go back. We've looked at the unique feature of bread that I'm creating, like Zachariah said. I could have this bag of flour, and I could keep it in my house for years and years without any obligations. But then, as soon as I add the water, then I create a dough. When I create the dough, I then create the situation in which I'm then required to separate challah.
Can I say like a secular view of it, like a drasha? Like if bread is made, like when bread made societies, like allowed people to not have to work so hard for food, and not for everybody. So people have individualized roles in society. For a lot of people. So when you give bread to the Cohn, it's showing that because of this thing that Hashem gave us, it allowed us to even have Kohanim to begin with, because that's like the most specialized role. Like he doesn't excellent.
I don't
have a source for that. It's just random.
No, it's very nice. It's also, you're talking about like there was a shift. Writes about they're like these science writers, right, Jared Diamond and other people. They talk about like at the beginning, the beginning of societies, people were very busy. Each family just spent all day, every day.
3 days and planting berries.
Hunter-gatherers, that's all we were doing. Right. But then as society changed, very, very interesting. Thank you. I actually read a book in a different context about potatoes. It's a great book. You should read it one day. Potatoes grow very, very easily, and they grow everywhere. And there were, like wars were won and lost based on where people grew potatoes. It's a bit like, it's the same idea in a different context of how when food is accessible, so then it frees me up to do other stuff.
Right.
And so your bread is one example, potatoes is another example of when food became very accessible. Wars were won and lost based on access to food. Okay. Thank you all very much. That is the Torah. Now, based on the Torah, we get to the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch, do you see that? Fabricio, the Torah and then the Shulchan Aruch. The two books that we were talking about, they go together. He says, I'm going to read the Shulchan Aruch. And then 3 laws from the Shulchan Aruch. Number 1, mitzvah say we have a positive mitzvah to donate from our dough and to give it to the Cohen. Okay. Originally, the mitzvah was only the land of Israel. However, nowadays it is extended to all over the world. Okay, number 1. Number 2, second point, number 2, this is important. At what stage do I become liable to separate the dough? Once I've completed the kneading process. I've kneaded the dough into one big chlump of dough. And it all becomes one uniform chlump of dough. At that stage, that's when I need to separate the challah. Okay, point number 2. Point number 3, and this is interesting. Isad ovet kochavim ptura. If an idol worshipper makes dough, then there's no obligation to separate challah on that. And look at this. Va'afilu lasha Yisrael. Even if a Jew works in a non-Jew's bakery, he has no obligation to separate challah. However, shel Yisrael chavet afilu shavet kochavim. But a non-Jew working in a Jewish bakery would be liable to separate challah. So it's not about the bread, it's about the owner. You follow? If it was about the bread, it doesn't matter whose bread it is. But it's more about a message to the Jewish people about our dependence on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, obviously on fruit and vegetables where I can see them growing around me, but even on those things that have a little bit of human intervention and a little bit of human ingenuity, even there we are required. Okay. Is that clear to everybody? Joy, happiness? Okay. That is the end of part number 1. Part number 1, that is the basis for the laws of Challah. Can we just pause for 1 minute now, and then we'll move on to part 9, pertaining to Challah. We saw already in the Shulchan Aruch that the mitzvah of separating Challah is once you have one big chlomp of challah. Now what we do is, the mitzvah is, you make the blessing, just like with every mitzvah, you make the blessing, and then you make a bracha. The bracha is, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu mitzvotav, God, you command us in our commandments, v'tzivanu, and you commanded us, lahafrish challah, to separate challah, or some people say, lahafrish challah min ha'isa. I think Sfaradim say lahafrish challah, and Sfaradim, Ashkenazim lafrish chalam min ha'isa. Just they add two words, but it's a very exciting bracha. Like we asher shanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu ladlik ner shel Shabbat and all. No, it's a mitzvah to Rabbanan, and if you ever make challah, you have this opportunity to make this blessing. Now, there's lots of symbolism that I'm not going to talk about now, but it's very, very exciting. It's the only only thing that I make, that I create, and I say this blessing on it. Now, which type of dough can I make the bracha on? I only make it on bread dough. You know, if you make a cake, you have a dough for a cake, or for all sorts of other things you might make doughs for. The only dough for which you make the bracha is dough for bread, because it's about creating the staple food, not about creating a dessert, but about creating a staple food. There's some people that make challah every week, and then, you know, every challah for Shabbat, they make challah at home, and then they can make this blessing every week. There's sort of a skulot, you know, like people when you want to pray for somebody who's not well and they should become well again, and various other areas that you want to pray for somebody. Sometimes this mitzvah of separating challah is a mitzvah that people perform in the merit of other people. How much dough do you need to make in order to separate challah? Now, this is a bit complicated, because maybe some of you will understand this better than I do. There's different types of flour, and different types of flour have different amounts of weight. In general, the amount is, I think it's about this, as we saw in the Talmud, it's asirit ha'efa. Asirit ha'efa is a measurement that translates to approximately 2.5 liters.
That's a lot of flour.
Yeah, but when we translate 2.5 liters to different grains, it comes to different weights.
The finer the flour, the less volume it would be.
Oh, there you are, exactly. So, normally, we say over here, the Ashkenazim say that if you use less than 1.2 kilograms, then you don't make a bracha. But if you use 1.6 kilograms, 1.6 is like, don't they come in kilogram bags? So it's just over 1.5 bags. Or 1.66 kilograms, then you would make a bracha. There are some who hold you need more, 2.25 kilograms, but most people say 1.6 kilograms of flour in order to make a lafrish challah. Rav Ovadia Yosef has slightly smaller amounts, and Rav Mordechai Eliyahu is somewhere in the middle. He says 2.5. So if you want to be safe, according to all opinions, you would make 2.5 kilograms, although most Ashkenazim are happy with 1.66, and most Sfaradim are happy with 1.6. Okay.
1.6, so the dough is the best of the day.
Huh?
It is 1.2, 1.6 is the amount of the dough.
No. It's the weight of the flour. Sorry, the weight of the flour before I add the water. Yeah, I want to create 2.5 liters worth, and it's about 1.6 or 1.8 kilograms of flour before I add the water. Now, do you understand that that's talking about wheat? But what happens if I'm using whole meat or using spelt? Some of the other, I think the numbers would go down. Would I need more weight or less weight?
I thought the weight was constant. It's the volume. It's the weight per volume that changes.
So which one creates a bigger volume?
What creates a bigger volume would be the coarser flour has more volume for a certain amount of weight.
You mean that's like whole meat?
Yeah.
So therefore, if I'm making with whole meat, I would need slightly less because I would create the same volume of dough with a smaller amount of flour.
Oh, weird.
Is that right? Have I got that right or the wrong way around?
Maybe I don't know.
Anyway, the best is just to ask somebody to be safe about these things. A lot of people here, you have like 100% whole flour or 70% whole flour. When you have that, some people say if you're using, I think you need more flour. I think white flour raises more than and therefore you would need, if you're using whole wheat as opposed to normal wheat. I don't know which one's normal. If you're the healthier the flour, the more flour you need. You follow? So if I'm using the unhealthy flour, I can use about 1.66 kilograms. But if I'm using the healthier flour, I need about 2 kilos. Is that clear to everybody? Okay. That's in terms of separating the flour. What we do now is, so I got this flour, I make the blessing, and then I take a small bit and I separate it. Once I've separated it, some people put it in the oven and burn it and then throw it away. But some people just wrap up that flour, that dough, and then discard it. It has to be you can't just like a pick. It has to be a small amount, like the size of a tennis ball amount, or a golf, but somewhere between a table tennis and a tennis ball, about that size of of dough. You take that and then you wrap it in a bag and then you discard it. And with that, you have now fulfilled the mitzvah. Just as a separate point, what happens if I make all my bread and then I realize I forgot to separate the challah? What do you do after the bread is all ready?
So there is nothing left. Everything has been baked.
Yeah, I've baked everything. Instead of having a big bowl of dough, I've now got 4 loaves of bread.
Does it matter?
No, it doesn't. Quite right.
Yeah, I think
you can separate. You do the same process, but rather than doing the process on the dough, you just do the process on the bread.
The bread.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the finer the flour, the less weight per volume. So if you have a certain amount of volume, it weighs less.
So I would need less flour then.
Right. For the finer stuff, you would need less. And for the coarser stuff, you need more flour by weight to get the same volume measurement.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, that is the laws of Challah. Is that clear until now? So we spoke about the basis of the mitzvah, which is from this week's parasha. Then we spoke about the laws of separating Challah. Everyone here comfortable now doing Hafrashat Challah? Separating Challah? Okay, now I just want to spend a few minutes with this really, really very, very brilliant little idea that explains the context of the mitzvah of Challah. The mitzvah of Challah, as you know, appears immediately after the story of the spies. And I would not originally have thought there's any connection between the story of the spies that came to visit the land of Israel and then came back with a terrible report on the land of Israel. And then immediately after that story, we have the mitzvah of Challah. I would have, not every time is there there's always symbolism, but I may not have paid attention to the fact that you have the spies, and then immediately after that the mitzvah of Challah, I may not have paid attention to that were it not for the Midrash. If you have a look in source number 10, look what the Midrash says. The Midrash says, Bo'ota Sha'ah, meaning the Jewish people, as you know, were in a state of absolute despair. We, the Jewish people, were about to enter the land of Israel. If we go now to the story of the spies, the Jewish people were about to enter the land of Israel. Spies were sent out to check out the land of Israel. Again, because we know today the end of the story, it's hard for us really to be present with the pain of Am Yisrael. But the spies were sent. They came back and they had bad things to say about the land of Israel. HaKadosh Moshe Rabbeinu was obviously upset. And the Torah tells us that night, the night they came back, the entire Jewish people cried. Now, Vayivku kol ha'am, the people cried because they're expecting, and now it's, look, they had a dream and then it's not working exactly as they had planned. And then God says, the Gemara tells us, God says to the Jewish people that you cried, Am Yisrael, you cried for no reason. Because you were worried about entering out, but really it wasn't a justified cry. I'm going to make you cry for every generation. And you know what night it is, the night that they came back?
The night of
Yes, exactly. Now, the Midrash on that night, meaning on that night, Tisha B'Av. You hear this? Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe. God said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe, the Jewish people, says God to Moshe Rabbeinu, the Jewish people are down, they're depressed, they're upset. Why? Because they were expecting to come to the land of Israel. Now the whole plan is all out. No one's, all of this generation, these people who are about to enter the land of Israel, do you understand? It's very hard to really be there in that moment. You've been dreaming of something, and your parents and grandparents for years, to enter the land of Israel. It's like the dream, and it's about to happen, and then you find it's not going to happen. You follow? So they were down. They were down, right? And God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, the Jewish people are down. And then what does God say? What's the solution? God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, cheer them up. So then Moshe Rabbeinu says to God, Amer lefanav, Moshe Rabbeinu says to God, Ribono shel olam, Master of the world, Bameh aratzem, what can I do to lift them up? Amar le, tzei u'tzei b'divrei Torah, teach them Torah, Shneimar daber b'nei Yisrael, ki tavo v'asitem Yisrael Hashem. And then, what does Moshe Rabbeinu teach them? He teaches them the laws of the Nisachim, and what we just learned, Hafrashat Challah. So Hafrashat Challah and Nesachim that we'll come to in a minute, this mitzvah of Challah is the mitzvah that comforted the Jewish people after the pain of the spies. Isn't that incredible? So the question, why, how, what? Nachon, that's what you're all thinking. What? How, and Challah, that we've just been just, how's that Challah, spies, how are they connected in any way? Why? How's this particular mitzvah going to cheer them up? You hear the question? Is that clear to you? Okay. So I want to share with you, the truth is it's a very, very long piece by the Shem Shmuel, but I want to introduce what the Shem Shmuel said with like another teaching, and then from that teaching we'll come to understand this. I want to come back to Tisha B'Av. As you know, this story is all connected to Tisha B'Av. Why? Because Tisha B'Av was the day that the spies came back, and the people cried on that night. And God said, you cry tonight for every generation until the building of the temple, please God, should be soon, meaning for us now in exile, we'll be crying every year on the night that the Jews came, that the spies returned. Okay. So I want to ask you an unrelated Tisha B'Av question, but from the unrelated Tisha B'Av question, we're going to come back to understand the connection between Challah and the spies in the Shem Shmuel. Okay? So we'll just leave for 1 minute and I'll ask you a question. Does anyone here know what the Shabbat after Tisha B'Av is called? Anyone know?
Oh, this is something about compassion.
Yes. Nachamu.
Oh.
Shabbat Nachamu. Shabbat Nachamu, based on the prophecy of Isaiah, comfort. Shabbat of comfort. So the Shabbat after the pain of Tisha B'Av, the Shabbat immediately afterwards is the Shabbat of comfort to help us, get back on our feet after Tisha B'Av. So the question is, what comfort is there in the Shabbat after Tisha B'Av? Last year, I'll tell you what happened last year. Please God, this year it'll be different. But I'll tell you what happened last year. Last year, we had Tisha B'Av. And last year on Tisha B'Av, we all sat on the floor and we cried. Right? And then at the end of the fast, we broke the fast, had a meal. And then the following Shabbat was Shabbat Nachamu. But in terms of the old city of Jerusalem, in terms of the pain of the Jewish people, nothing actually changed. You follow? So what's the comfort? What comfort do we get on Shabbat Nachamu? You follow? Like I'll give you an example. If, I don't know, my child has, their favorite toy, and their favorite toy got broken, and they're really, really distraught about it. Nachon? So it's not an expensive toy, it's not so you'll buy a toy, and then they'll get over the old toy because now they have a new toy. I can see that they're comforted. You follow? We give them a hug, but there's something's changed. We feel embraced. Here, we experience Tisha B'Av, mourning the temple, but the Temple Mount looks exactly the same on Tisha B'Av as it looks on Shabbat Nachamu. So where's the comfort in Shabbat Nachamu? You follow my question?
Yeah.
Meaning, what happened that makes us feel comforted on Shabbat Nachamu? And yeah.
Isn't it like parallel to the Torah where we have cried in the 9th of Av?
Yes.
And then after that, the Mitzvah of Challah has been...
Yes, that's our question.
Yeah. And then after that, we have the Shabbat Nachama.
No. So the Challah, the Mitzvah... I didn't think of linking Shabbat Nachamu. The Shabbat, when they cried on that night, the following Shabbat, I wonder if that was... Not sure if that was a Shabbat Nachamu for them. Shabbat Nachamu is the Shabbat after Tisha B'Av. It's a good question about what happened on that first Shabbat after the spies came back. They cried Tisha B'Av. There was no temple. They were still in the desert. So they cried, right? And then God said, today's the day the temple will be destroyed and you'll cry for many generations. What happened that following Shabbat? That's a good question. I don't know. But the Shem Shmuel elsewhere explains that the comfort of Tisha B'Av is this, and it's a very, very deep idea. He says, one of the most painful aspects of mourning is the sense of loneliness. When I'm in pain, like the most painful people, you sit by yourself in a corner and you cry. But if I'm sitting in the corner over there crying, and I see that you're sitting in the corner here crying, and I see that he's over there, and we see that there's him and 100, 1,000, 2,000, 1 million Jews, 6 million Jews, 8 million, 12 million Jews around the world crying on this day. So then I realize I'm not alone in my pain. And the comfort is not that something new happened, but rather I now realize that I'm not alone in my pain. You follow? Sometimes the change isn't because the world got better, but rather because I see that the pain that I'm experiencing isn't just mine, but it's something that we're sharing together. So the experience of Tisha B'Av is the comfort, because I realize I'm not alone. You hear that idea? Okay. With that, I want to come to the mitzvah of Challah. Okay. This is quite a long piece, but I think I'm only going to go to the end, the second piece, second part of it. Yeah, at the top of page 3. Okay, before I start reading the Shem Yishmor, just a very little introduction. The first time, as far as I know, that the Jewish people all did something, Kol Ha'am, Vayivku Kol Ha'am, the whole nation cried together, was on the night that the spies came back. You follow? Now, it was, when we received the Torah, we all said, Na'aseh v'nishma, right? This was like a communal acknowledgement of our receiving of the Torah, right? But on this night, when the spies came back with their bad report concerning the land of Israel, everybody cried. Now, why was he was crying? Because his dream of coming to the land of Israel won't be fulfilled. And she's crying because her dream of coming into... And each person cried, but each person was crying not as part of a nation, but each person was crying as an individual on their own personal grief. You follow? Now, I just want to contrast the crying together here with the receiving the Torah. When we all received the Torah on Mount Sinai, so we were united in receiving the Torah. Why? We were all at this event, and we saw the thunder, Kolot of Rakim, there was thunder, and it was an awesome experience, and we were all there, and we all witnessed that, and we were all united by what we saw. You follow? Here, they're coming back, the spies are coming back, and the spies are reporting bad on Israel. And then each person who heard that report, each person went into their home and they started crying. But I wasn't crying because you're crying or because we weren't all together watching something. Each person went into their home and they started crying. At this moment, after the sin of the spies, something happened to the Jewish people that had never happened before. They realized that we are not only united as part of a nation, but each individual is united too. I mean, we're not just united because we're part of the same thing. We're united as individuals too. Let me explain what I mean by that. Let's say we all go to a concert together, right? So when we all go to a concert together, we're all united, but we're united because we're all there together. You follow? We're all singing the same songs because at the front of the stage there's a singer and he's singing and we're all joining in. We are all part of an audience, right? You follow? So we're united as part of a nation. So there are some events like Matan Torah, and the Matan Torah experience is like going to a concert, Lahavdil. We're all the audience. So therefore, of course, we're all united because we were all there together. You follow? But if, let's say, Chas v'shalom, I am sitting in Tokyo or in, the Philippines or sitting in America, and I'm sitting in my house, right? And I turn on the news and I hear something terrible happened in Israel, and then you're crying in your home in Tokyo, and you're crying in the Philippines, and you're crying in America, and he's crying in Hong Kong, and each one of us is crying in our homes. That's not connected because we're all an audience at an event. That's a much deeper connection. We're not connected as a community, but we are connected as individuals. You follow? Meaning you as an individual are connected to you as an individual. We're not together experiencing a show at which we are an audience, but you in your home, and you in your home, and him in his, everyone in each person's home is connected to one another. We are connected not as a community, but we are even connected as individuals. You follow? It's a deeper level of connection. You follow? We feel it right now in Israel. You know, when everybody after Simchat Torah, more than ever before, more than in any living history, you know, every single Jew around the world felt connected. But because we're connected, not just because we weren't all an audience watching a show like Matan Torah, but each individual in their home was connected. You follow? We reached a level of connection with one another after the sin of the spies that we hadn't achieved beforehand. Prior to the sin of the spies, we were connected. Prior to the sin of the spies, we were connected like an audience at a concert. You follow? Meaning, as a community, we were connected. When we get together, then we're connected. We're connected when we pray together. We're connected when we sing together. We're connected when we go to the Mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash. We're connected as a community. But what you do in your home is different to what he does in his home, and she does in her home, and they do in their home. Everyone's different individually. But the sin of the spies, something new happened. We weren't just connected as a community, but each individual felt connected to everybody else. You follow? Because each of us heard it, and then each of us started to cry. Atem Shomim, not as a community, but as an individual. And through that, we come to the mitzvah of Challah. So I want to go to the bottom of page, top of page number 3. He says like this: V'chein yesh lomar b'mitzvat Challah, shehi mipat kibat kortei hasolet v'shiura me'isa, shehu omer k'tei isat hamidbar, isat omer לגולגולת, שמורה על הכוח הכללי שבכל גולגולת וגולגולת. What is a dough? The dough is the symbolism of bringing all these different disparate parts and creating them into one new thing. You follow? Like a little grain of flour here, all these grains, mix it with water, and you create this gush that never existed before. We're connected not just as a tzibur, as a community, but each individual is connected too. That's why he cried in his home, and they cried in their home, and he cried in his, and she cried in her. You follow? Each one. Okay, let's go to that. Zachu mip'at chashon v'zeh shetiktek v'karam otam aniyim haynu shelo matzu shuv me'atzmam עוד שהוא מעלה אלא כמו אני המדוחה שאין בו בלתי עם גיאותו ואדמתו. The Jewish people were depressed. Each one was crying in their own little thing. So therefore, what did God say? God gave them mitzvah of Challah and said, even now, you're not alone. Even now, you are part of a community. Just like that Nachamu. You follow? When I'm crying in my house, and you're crying in your house, and he's crying in his house, and she's crying in her house, and we're all crying about the same thing, then we realize that we are united. You follow? That's what brings us together. And the symbolism of that, all these different things coming together to become something one, that is the Challah. You follow? The Challah is the symbol of taking all these different things, mixing them together, and creating a whole. You follow? So the comfort for the Jewish people was not that anything changed, but I realized I'm not alone. I'm not just part of the Jewish community when we are in public events, when we pray together, but even when I'm sitting alone in my home as an individual, I'm still part of the Jewish community. You follow? And the symbolism to say that each person is part of the bigger whole, the metaphor for that is the transformation of flour and water to dough. And that's why this mitzvah was given now, to tell us that our unity isn't just when we're together, but our unity is even when we are apart from one another. You hear that? Okay, I'm just going to read the last bit, and then with this we'll conclude. Each one of us can derive inspiration. Even when you feel alone. Don't give up. Understand, even when I'm sitting by myself in the room, I should still realize I'm part of the Jewish people. You follow? Even when I'm by myself, I'm not alone. That's the symbolism that we learn from the Challah. The Jewish people, in a funny sort of way, created a deeper sense of unity as a result of the sin of the spies, greater than the unity that they experienced at Mount Sinai. Because at Mount Sinai, lahavdil is like being in a concert, right? So we're all unified because we're all there together. You follow? But when the spies came back, he was crying. Each one was crying in a different place. You follow? And they still felt part of something together. It taught me that my unity or my affiliation with the Jewish people isn't just when we're all together, but my affiliation is even when I'm sitting by myself crying, I'm still not crying alone. This message was true, of course, in the Midrash over here. I think it's probably truer in the last few months than it's been for many, many, many years. Jews around the world sitting by themselves crying and understanding that they're not alone. We're all crying with you. We're all together. And that sense of unity is what gives us strength. I'm going to continue this. Just finish off these words. Even when you feel very far away. Don't give up. Let this thing inside of you, this sense of Jewish peoplehood that exists inside each of us as individuals, let that light up inside you. Uva hakoach haklali. Vahi mesaya bekoach haklali lashuv la'or ba'or chayim. And through that sense of I'm part of the Jewish people, even when I'm alone, let that allow me to draw me to everybody else. I'll become like this little grain of flour that will join the water and create the dough, and I will understand that even when I'm alone, I'm still part of this amazing nation. So, sweet, wonderful people, we've looked at a beautiful little journey on the laws of Challah. We looked at this very unusual mitzvah of I create something, and then when I create it, I am then, through creating it, become required to separate a truma, which we call Challah. We looked at the basis of this mitzvah. We looked at halachot of the mitzvah. We discussed how much dough you need to make. And then we spoke about the connection between this mitzvah of Challah that we read in the second part of this week's Sedra, and we connect it through the Midrash to the beginning of this week's parasha, where we spoke about the spies. That the spies, in our pain, each person in their home, I'm crying, but the fact that I'm crying here and you're crying there and everyone's crying in different places, I realize that my connection to the Jewish people isn't just a connection when we are physically all together, but even when I'm sitting by myself in my home crying, that moment is also a moment that I feel part of the Jewish people, and it's through that realization that I'm able to lift myself up, as we do after Tisha B'Av and move to Shabbat Nachamu. Yishar Koach to all of you. A joy, as always, to learn with you. It is cool.